Welcome to the Weekly Wars podcast, where two guys who talk about Star Wars way too much have decided to record it and let you listen. Be sure to check every Wednesday to get the latest episode. And now to Zach and Rhett.
Hello and welcome to Weekly Wars, your weekly dose of all things Star Wars.
This is episode 6, so people are close to not being confused about us anymore, thinking that we're lining these up with each episode of the movies.
That would be confusing.
A couple of people have said that to me, sorry.
Well, I hope we don't confuse them anymore.
Well, we're close. Episode 7 maybe will be confusing, and then we'll move on.
And then we're done. My name is Rhett.
I'm Zach. And this week, we are going to start a sort of ongoing series. We're going to revisit it every once in a while, talking about our favorite, well, all the lightsaber battles, all the significant lightsaber battles in the movies and in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, mostly the lightsaber on lightsaber fights from the movies, and then some significant ones from the TV shows, the 3 different incarnations we have. Because Clone Wars has tons of fights, and it would be a lengthy endeavor to try and cover all of them.
And not all of them are significant. They're just, some of them are just
or
there.
Even that interesting in certain cases.
Right.
But we will touch on some of our more favorite ones from the TV shows. But this week, we wanted to start off with just the lightsaber fights from episodes 1 and 2.
And we're going to break it down into 3 categories, each lightsaber fight that we talk to. We're going to talk to the lightsaber fight.
That's how you get to know the lightsaber fight. You have to talk to it. Become one with it.
So we have 3 topics. We're going to talk about plot relevance, and we think that's important from a storytelling perspective, because lightsaber fights should not just happen for the sake of visual effects and having a lightsaber fight.
Right. Every fight, regardless of implements and style, should have a story behind it.
That's true. Every fight.
If there's not a story, or if it doesn't advance the story, then it's just there. Exists in a void.
And some action movies, it's okay, but it's way better if there's actually plot significance.
Right. Some of the kung fu movies that I love to watch have lots of fluff fight scenes for no other reason than he looked at me funny.
He looked at me wrong. He's from another school.
He's wearing the wrong color scarf.
The other thing, the second thing we're going to address is the choreography. And Rhett is our local weapons expert, so we're actually going to talk about some aspects of actual sword fighting along with that. So not just how the choreography looks or if it works, but if it's realistic and makes sense.
As much as a weapon of unknown qualities
in a science fiction fantasy universe.
Right. As much quantifiable data as we have on it, I will try to address.
And then the final one is the emotional impact of the fight. Because we actually think there's some fights that maybe are terrible in the other respects, but actually mean something.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some of them where it is terribly choreographed. I don't want to go too deep into it, but A New Hope, for example, it's a pretty lousy fight in terms of exchanges, but it is amazingly in-depth in terms of emotion.
And it advances the plot. So we're gonna dig into that. So those are the 3 topics.
Yeah, and this first episode, like I said, episodes 1 and 2, we're going to address episode 3 in its own podcast because of how many fights it has in that one film. And then we'll probably look at breaking down the other ones as we get closer to those in the next couple of weeks or so.
And we'll eventually make our way to episode 7, and then we'll wait for episode 8 to come out and see what happens there.
Yeah.
So, alrighty. Well, the first fight...
starting chronologically
starting with episode 1, is Qui-Gon Jinn versus Darth Maul. And again, just to reiterate, we're talking about actual lightsaber duels. So both of the contestants have lightsabers.
Yeah, and I did also want to point out
we don't the two contestants.
Right. But I did want to point out we do have ratings that we've personally assigned to some of those three categories of the fights. Those are not quantified in any way. They don't have any mathematical relevance to what's going on. It's merely just a placeholder to showcase the general feel of it. And they are also completely subjective. We do have differing views on the ratings of some of these duels. And
so if you feel differently, we want to hear about it. We want to hear what your ratings are going to be. You can get on our Facebook, you can get on YouTube, you can get on Podbean and tell us, say, hey, I actually think this should be a little higher of a rating, and give us your rating and tell us why. And if we like it, we'll bring it up in future episodes and say, hey, this guy actually brought up a really good point, or this girl.
Yeah, if we don't like it, it will be as if it never existed. Or maybe we'll bring it up just to make you feel good about yourself.
So the first fight that we see in episode 1 is between Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul on Tatooine. Darth Maul has just hunted down the Jedi and Padme, and as they are planning to leave after the pod race, he basically jumps off his speeder and confronts him, and Qui-Gon needs to hold him off long enough for them to escape.
Right. Anakin, run! That scenario. So overall with the Phantom Menace, I feel like they have the weakest fights in terms of plot relevance, and
at least this actually creates a Phantom Menace.
It's true.
Like at the bare minimum, like they don't see Darth Maul or anything, and this is their first encounter and only encounter with him until the end of the movie.
Right.
So at a bare minimum, it's like, okay, they actually know that there's a Phantom Menace, assuming that that's not referring to Palpatine. But that's a whole other discussion.
Well, it's probably both. But he's only Phantom, or he is a Phantom in terms of he has almost no influence on what happens until that moment. And that's why I don't think it does anything for the plot. He shows up. It says, hey, there's a villain. There's drama, quote unquote, because there's not much drama. So it's, hey, there's a bad guy, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't advance anything necessarily beyond making the characters aware of the Sith. I mean, like
yeah, well, he's a bad guy at that point because he has a red lightsaber.
Yeah, well, and they don't even know he's a Sith necessarily. They suppose that he is, that he could be because he's well trained in the Jedi arts.
Well, and in context of the movies, you never even learn what a Sith is other than they appear to be dark side of Jedi.
Yeah, they're just bad people, but they're well trained in the Jedi arts usually, according to some people.
And so he shows up and he's just a bad guy. So yeah, in terms of plot or explaining the overarching plot of the first 3 movies, pretty much no relevance.
Right. And so I gave this a rating of 1 out of 5 just because it says there's a villain, but besides that, like there's nothing. I
give it a 2 out of 5 because it does set up. You see his lightsaber and you're kind of like, that's really long. And if you saw the trailer, you're expecting it to be a double-bladed lightsaber, so it gives it a little bit of a setup. So I'll give it a 2 out of 5, maybe like a 1.5 out of 5.
That's good. Yeah. I still say 1, but sure.
It doesn't get a full point for that, I don't think. I don't, it's not significantly relevant to the plot that he has a double-bladed lightsaber.
Yeah, that's just more coolness factor.
Cool. So I'll give it half a point, I guess. The choreography in that fight is fine. There's actually tension in the fight. Like there is a timetable. Like they're trying to escape. So there is actually they are running about, and Qui-Gon's trying to find a way to get everyone onto the ship while fighting him off. So he's sort of fighting defensively and feels somewhat overwhelmed.
Yeah, and they do have that moment of they're taking off, and it's like, oh, Qui-Gon's got to get up there. How there's that drama as well that he needs to escape. Will he escape, perhaps, type of thing. And that fighting defensively, I think, definitely comes into play because he is, for whatever reason, he's not trying to stop Maul. He's just trying to hold him off so that they can get away because of the sudden attack.
And as they say later, which does not come into play at the end of the movie, but as they say later, they do need to find out who Darth Maul is. Is he the Master? Is he the Padawan? Is the Sith Resurgence?
Yeah.
Like, what is he?
Yeah, so choreography isn't too bad.
It's a quick
first
fight.
time. Yeah, it's a very quick fight. It's the first time you get to see this style in the prequels. Like out of you've seen them fight before, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, but this is the first time you see two lightsaber wielders going at it, and
it's
I
even
really
more
like,
fast paced than Return of the Jedi at this point. So
right,
it's already taking it a step up from where they were there.
And I really like the intro to it in terms of Maul coming up on the speeder bike and he leaps off and attacks in that motion. Like that's pretty cool. So they definitely have some of that cool factor, and they give you the implication of the height of the Jedi Order is what they're trying to, the full power of a fully trained Jedi is what they're trying to show. And I think Qui-Gon and Maul are able to show that fairly well.
I have heard some complaints that people don't understand if these Jedi have never been fighting Sith, why they would know how to fight with lightsabers.
Because Jedi have lightsabers and you have to spar with someone, maybe? I don't know.
Right, like you go through Jedi training and we see the little kids training, and this goes back to our how to watch movies thing.
Yeah, but they all have lightsabers. If they had to learn how to use them, they would have had to learn with other people. But they don't mention this in the movie, but it does talk about how those types of lightsaber combat forms that are never mentioned except in expanded universe materials. The forms that focused on lightsaber combat had fallen out of use because no one needed to. But everyone still learns the basics of it. But also, it's imposed by the fan community that Qui-Gon knows the Ataru form, which is a lightsaber on lightsaber combat. So he was prepared.
Yeah, I'd assume they practice. I assume there's Jedi who fall away occasionally that they might have to engage in a fight with.
Yeah, in the young adult novel series of Obi-Wan as a Padawan, Qui-Gon's former apprentice fell to the dark side. So Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon had experience fighting dark Jedi in that sense. Anyways, so choreography, it's not terrible. It's not anything. It's exciting for it being the first fight, but besides that, it's pretty basic. I would probably give it a 3.5. Why not?
I would do a 3.5 out of 5 too.
Yeah, it'll do. As for the last bit,
which we sort of talked about the drama. But
we
the
already
drama's
did cover
towards the choreography. So yeah, emotional impact. It doesn't really have a significant amount of emotional impact.
Yeah, it's pretty.
No one loses. No one wins.
Yeah.
There's no ties to either of the characters really significantly at that point. So it just sort of.
Anakin was very emotionally affected, but I think in general, as an audience, you don't really care about it.
Yeah, most everyone hated Jake Lloyd.
Right.
They're all like, if that kid would have died, it would have been fine.
So that brings us to the next fight in Phantom Menace, which I have titled Battle of the Fates.
Battle of the Fates.
Or, sorry, I should say John Williams titled Battle of the Fates. That's because of the fantastic musical score that accompanied that last battle.
Which actually made it have some emotional impact.
Yeah, it did affect it.
It did actually make it, you're all like, oh, this is epic. This music is epic.
It's an epic confrontation of kind of nothing, because in terms of plot relevance, there's still not a whole lot. They just see him and they're like, hey, let's fight. There's almost no reason for them to do it, besides they know that he's a bad guy because he's attacked, but they don't even attempt. They don't even...
Which is what they talk. This is what I was saying earlier. The Jedi Council says we need to discover who these people are and what's going on, and we'll use all of our resources. First time they run into him, no, we're just going to fight and kill you.
Right, and it's totally an un-Jedi thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
They should have tried everything else. But, like, if you get attacked, self-defense is totally fine for a Jedi. But if you face off against someone and have a stare down, and the first thing you think is, oh, I should probably kill this dude... Then and they
were aggressors. He was just standing there when he appears, and then they're all like, "Okie dokie, let's take off our cloaks." And he's all like, "Okay, well, I guess we're gonna do this."
Yeah, he didn't make a move towards Padme. He didn't move towards Anakin, Obi-Wan, anyone. I don't know. Like nothing was done, and they start fighting. So in terms of plot, I definitely would say this is like a 0 to a 1.
Well, I do have to say it does set up the end of the duel does set up Obi-Wan to be Anakin's master and train him as a Jedi. And but I don't know if that's the lightsaber fight itself. Like the fight itself doesn't contribute to that, but the end result of what happens does.
Yeah. The only counter I'd have to that is if you take the machete order of film watching and just cut it out, you're not going to be super confused by Obi-Wan being Anakin's Padawan.
That's true.
Anakin being Obi-Wan's Padawan.
It could have gone either way anyways.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like it may be that Qui-Gon would have been allowed to train Anakin still, even if he had stayed alive, because he said he was going to, but... Yeah. The Jedi Council could have intervened.
Yeah. So I guess for potential plot relevance, considering the entire trilogy, you could give it a slightly higher rating. I'll go with 1. A 1, I think, is...
I'll give it a 2, but that's being generous. Being very generous. The choreography, I think, as a kid, it was awesome.
Right.
Like, as a kid, I was just like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. He's got a
stuff
double-bladed
is flying,
lightsaber.
They're
and
jumping great distances.
Right. Like, I was just like, this is amazing. I can't believe it. And I still talk to people today who say, that fight, man, that is the best lightsaber fight of all the lightsaber fights I've seen.
I've heard that pretty often as well. People definitely enjoyed it as a fight. I have to say that there is some stuff about it that bothers me. And with prequel fights in general, they get into this 2 versus 1 thing pretty often. And
it's very poorly implemented.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of like, oh, I just attacked, now you attack while I like reset myself.
You literally see them waiting for their turn to attack.
Right. Or doing a superfluous spin move when all they had to do was just hit in a different spot at the same time and they would have won instantly.
They would have killed him. And I think I understand how it's hard to do that kind of choreography, but they did have a double-bladed lightsaber, and I think if they had worried more about doing that instead of just super fast-paced, because that seemed to be the number one thing on their mind.
Yeah, Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious, right. But if they had taken a little more time to think about that, it actually could have been consistent choreography that I didn't sit and watch as an adult and go, why is he just standing there?
Yeah.
Why doesn't he do something?
Yeah, so to the first time, through the first time viewing and to most people, it's a fine fight. But when you do sit down and look at it and break it down like we've done before,
because we're nerds,
you begin to realize that, holy crap, they could have finished that so quickly. I do have to say that for the complete impracticality of the saber staff or the double-bladed lightsaber as a weapon, Ray Park seems to be able to sell it pretty well that you could use it. He uses it in a way that's like, okay, sure.
And there's a couple little moments where this is only against Obi-Wan at that point of the fight, but Obi-Wan's coming after him and Darth Maul is spinning away from him, but he swings his lightsaber with it, so he's not just leaving his back open to get sliced
he's swinging
up.
And spinning. And I think he's even swinging low so that Obi-Wan can't necessarily step in without getting his feet clipped at.
Yes, exactly. And so the spinning isn't as egregious in that moment. So there do seem to be little moments, whether it was intentional or not, where it sort of works. And I would probably give all the credit to Ray Park for selling that. Yeah,
that's definitely his kung fu background coming into play, I think, that he's able to make that a viable option at that point.
Yeah, it actually seems like someone could use it, although, I would cut my head off like within 5 seconds of playing with that weapon.
Anyone would.
Yeah.
There's really, I mean, even with the assistance of space magic, like that still is a good freaking way to die. And one thing that should be brought up, I think, is that it's not as simple as just using like a quarterstaff or a bow staff in other types of martial arts, because in those you usually change your grip pretty frequently, and you range from the very extreme ends of the staff to the middle, and so you lose, like, I would say even up to 3/4 of the techniques that you'd normally use with a bow staff without being able to grab the ends. Like, that severely limits your ability to manipulate things, and it definitely doesn't increase your range with the lightsaber at all. It shortens you up pretty quick because you can't extend as much as
you can with a regular, or even just a single hilt, a longer hilt.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when he's using it without the other end activated, that gives you a pretty significant reach advantage, because you have an extra almost foot, it looks like, over someone else. So you can be able to thrust from a greater distance. But once you activate that other end, it loses a lot of that. And I don't even think that it could necessarily be better for 2-on-1 fighting. But they just went for what was cool. And it does look cool if you...
Can you imagine what Ray Park did if he went Musashi and just had 2 lightsabers in that fight?
See,
like
and
2 separate lightsabers, and he would have fought both of them with those?
Yeah, Asajj Ventress status like that, because you actually have 2 planes of defense rather than... You can't get that with the saber staff, because if you hold it horizontally, you lose a whole bunch of range, and it just is the one angle. If you have 2 lightsabers and you do the Musashi status that he talks about when Musashi stance, he talks about when fighting multiple opponents, you have so much more range. You can hold it vertically, so it covers a lot more planes of defense, and it just gives you way more options.
So I'm going to give the choreography 3 out of 5.
I'd say
as an adult, as a kid, 5 out of 5. As an adult, 3 out of 5.
I'd give it a half point just for Ray Park's skills, just because he's, as a physical actor, he's pretty freaking fantastic. But definitely in terms of everything else, I think it's not as strong as it could be.
So emotional impact wise, I do think we actually do get to spend one movie with Qui-Gon, right, which is nice. And it's sort of reminiscent of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Unfortunately, well, I should say Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope, because we're still talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's in this movie. Kenobi. He is a newbie. But, he hasn't... Nothing tragic has happened to Obi-Wan, like had happened to Luke Skywalker. Yeah. He didn't make a sacrifice like
it wasn't
Obi-Wan
an intentional lifting up so he could be struck down and made stronger.
It was just he lost the fight.
That actually brings up a really good point, because in context of what you learn in the Clone Wars, it really should have been more of that. Like Qui-Gon knowing that technique to maintain his essence after he dies would have lent a whole new level of meaning to him giving up and letting himself die.
Just to give you some context, and spoiler warning if you haven't watched the 6th season of Clone Wars, but there's a story arc where Yoda learns about keeping your essence intact in the cosmic force, right, as opposed to the living force.
The general belief of Jedi is once you die, your essence becomes one with the Force. You basically dissipate, And then in a form of pseudo reincarnation, the Force essence will coalesce again into another life form at another point. So you're not maintaining a specific spiritual identity, but you do exist forever in that sense.
In the sense that you're one with the cosmic force now. But they actually find out that doctrine of the Jedi is wrong. And so if they had actually set that up with Qui-Gon, it actually would have been a better setup and payoff when Yoda says to Obi-Wan, I can set you up to talk to Qui-Gon for your training. And also when Anakin hears Qui-Gon saying, Anakin, no.
Right, in Attack of the Clones.
It would actually have more meaning that
well,
way.
And it also would have been very inspiring to Obi-Wan to do the same thing. If Qui-Gon had made that decision, actively, then it would have inspired Obi-Wan to do the same thing for Luke. But so in terms of potential emotional impact, it could have been high. And I know there are still times, even now when I'm watching it, seeing Qui-Gon die just breaks my heart. So I'd rate it somewhat high just for that. But I do think because of some sloppy directing, you don't get the full force of Qui-Gon that Liam Neeson could have brought. So I'm gonna go ahead and say a 3 out of 5.
I'm gonna go low again on this one and say 2 out of 5. I'm not as big of a fan of Qui-Gon as you are, though.
Oh, I love Qui-Gon.
I know you do.
He should have been so much more.
I do think he should have been so much more. And so, all right. So our next fight, we're going into episode 2. But before we get to this, if we're going chronologically, I think this is one of our honorable mentions here.
Yeah, not a lightsaber duel, but it's still
it's a fight that has a lightsaber between Obi-Wan and Jango Fett on Kamino.
Oh yeah, definitely one of the better enacted fight scenes.
And one of the only times that you actually see someone who holds their own against a Jedi that is not a Jedi.
Right. In all respects, Jango won that encounter. Because he didn't fall off. And even when Obi-Wan gets back up there and tracks him,
he was able to get away. And you see Obi-Wan running in and just getting blasted like crazy. And the first thing that Jango Fett goes for is to disarm him.
Right,
so
wrap
that he
up
can
his
control
arms
the
so
fight.
he can't use the lightsaber, and then keep him tied up so Obi-Wan can do that sweet flying kick. It's fantastic. Kick him out of the air.
It's legitimately good strategy, and it's a fun fight in an interesting setting, and a Jedi just does not straight up win.
Yeah, well, and
against a normal opponent, a non-Jedi opponent, or a non-Force using opponent.
Yeah, and I like the mention you had about the strategy, because that'll come into play with the actual lightsaber fight. But in terms of the duel, we have Obi-Wan and Anakin versus Count Dooku. And in terms of plot significance, I think it's relevant to the plot, but the setup for it is super weak. So it brings down my rating, because you just barely met Dooku not that long ago. You don't know a whole lot about him besides that he used to be Qui-Gon's master, and he's fallen for some reason that's never made clear. And
even though he's fallen too, they assume he's still a good guy because of his Jedi training.
Yeah, he's retired from the Order, which wasn't a thing that's necessarily common. And they're just like, oh, he used to be a Jedi. He would never assassinate somebody.
Yeah, it just wasn't very well explained or set up. And then you don't even meet him until
more than halfway.
Yeah, more than halfway through the movie. And so
yeah, so they chase him down to a secret hangar because they're trying to prevent him from escaping. And
they're trying to stop the war before it happens, essentially, is what they're going for.
So that in itself is pretty significant, but just the buildup to it is non-existent. There should have been so much more.
And there's no meaning to the fight because they don't really go into the depth of lightsaber combat. I assume that they were going to start talking more about that in these movies, but they really don't. And there's no explanation as to why one Jedi is better than another, other than They just are.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason for them to win. They all seem to have the same powers, the same training, the same skills.
There's nothing to differentiate them. And especially if you're talking about like power of the Force, or we've been told Anakin's raw power should be greater than almost anyone else, but he gets beaten pretty easily. So like, obviously Dooku has more training and experience, but there's no context for it.
Right.
I guess.
There's no, like, we don't see them comparing anything. Even when you get to the next fight, you're all like, okay, well, apparently they have equal force power because Yoda can block the lightning. Yeah. Like, there's just not a lot of context for what makes one Jedi better than another.
Yeah.
And at this point, you would hope that's there. Like, it seems arbitrary when Obi-Wan loses to Dooku, and then it seems arbitrary when Anakin loses to Dooku. There's no payoff, or especially the way that they lose, where Obi-Wan just sort of gets tagged and knocked away, and then Anakin gets force pushed and just stands there and lets his arm get cut off.
Well, and I think the interesting part about Obi-Wan's injuries in this fight is that it introduces an aspect of the lightsaber that you've never seen before, because for the most part, it just cuts through stuff. I mean, I guess to a certain extent, they are bouncing off like the rails in Cloud City, but like it usually just slices right through. And so it makes you wonder, is it a physical thing that prevents Dooku from just cutting through Obi-Wan? Because if he had like gone full force, he would have just taken off his arm and his leg.
It's plot convenience.
Yeah. So I mean, if there's physics of the lightsaber that we don't understand, that's one thing, but we don't understand it. So how are we supposed to find it?
Right. You watch it happen and you're just like, so this is basically because you don't want Obi-Wan to die.
Right. And he can't lose an arm because he doesn't have a robot arm later.
In the future.
So it's like, okay.
Yeah, right. It's just sort of there. So in terms of plot, I don't think they did a very good job setting it up. I don't think we understand why one or two would be more powerful than another, because they're kind of like, he's a Sith Lord, be careful.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, why is that significant? What makes him way better than you guys who have had 20 years of training, 30 years of training?
Yeah.
What is it? So
what training is used differently? They'll never tell us, because they don't even tell us what Sith are.
Yeah, they don't even tell us what the bad guys are even doing.
Movies, I mean,
except taking out the Jedi. So I'm going to be mean here. I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5.
I think a 3, just because the preventing the war is significant. You just don't realize it at the time. You're just not given that impact that you should be given.
I'm just being a jerk, because even though they do give you a few little things, I don't feel like it was enough and meant anything, and they did a terrible job. So I'm being a jerk.
What a jerk. But
so I'm okay with your 3 out of 5.
Conversely, the choreography in this, I think, is actually some of my favorite of the prequel trilogy.
So I was saying before that they don't really establish like these different lightsaber fights or what the lightsaber fighting means to these different people, but this is actually one of the fights where you do see a little bit of that.
Right.
Like you do see it, some of it. They don't explain it.
They do, I think they hint slightly at it with the design of Dooku's lightsaber. That curved hilt is actually one of those things that makes you realize, why don't they just do that on all of them? Like, that gives you a significant leverage advantage that seems like it'd be pretty applicable to all styles of lightsaber combat.
Especially if there is mass to the lightsaber blade.
Yeah, or perceived mass because of all the energy flowing around. So, yeah, definitely it gives a little more ergonomic control. So you get a hint at it with his lightsaber. And then when Anakin picks up the 2 lightsabers, he uses a different style. You can actually see his movements change. And that is a whole lot of fun to me. And they refer to it as the Jar-Kai style, for those of you who really want to know. Whenever they use 2 lightsabers at a time, usually independently, not like the saber staff, but two separate lightsabers. They call that Jar Kai in lightsaber combat terms. So the other thing I really, really like about it is how Dooku isolates the opponents. He maximizes on the hubris of Anakin and takes him out of the fight with the lightning immediately. And then it gives him time to deal with Obi-Wan. And he's obviously more competent, even though Obi-Wan is pretty competent as a lightsaber duelist. He's able to deliver those cuts that seem ineffectual, but are completely debilitating.
Well, and there's actual adaptability. I mean, you could say Anakin's dumb for running in, but really, Count Dooku is smart for taking out an opponent. That's basic self-defense. If you are trapped by multiple opponents and you can't escape, which should be your number one option, you find the biggest one, the scariest looking one, and you go all out and take him out as quickly as possible.
Right.
And, you know, if he's sitting there sensing him and he's charging and he's just like, I'm just going to zap you and take you out using his force power. I mean, he went immediately to the electricity. There was no buildup. It's just like, you're done.
And then he takes out Obi-Wan and in time to defend against Anakin's attacks. So he's isolated them down. He's able to take them on one-on-one, and that's where his real strategy, like you mentioned with Jango, when they thought out these fights for Attack of the Clones, it seems like they actually put thought into strategy. And
well, even Obi-Wan defends after seeing the lightning blast. He's all like, oh, okay, and blocks it with his lightsaber.
Right, and this was actually a point I was going to bring up, because that's that guard that he assumes is a fairly typical guard of lots of different one-handed and two-handed sword styles. In German treatises, they refer to it as long point. You essentially just hold it out, and it creates maximum distance while maintaining defense. And with that slight angle, too, you're covering a wide plane of attack. So not only was it good to block the lightning, but it's also good for blocking general attacks at that point.
So it's pretty good. I guess I could give it a 4 out of 5.
I give it a very solid 4, just because they do incorporate some different elements. I really like the cinematography that they do with some of it. Some of it's pretty simple, but when Anakin cuts the power to the lights, I still love that visualization.
The lighting's pretty cool.
And then, speaking more of guards, him and Dooku both move into that guard high over the head, which in German treatises, that's referred to as Vomtag, and kind of colloquially as a high Vomtag, which is a pretty common guard. And I love that they incorporate it into this lightsaber fight. And then with the visual of the dark and the red and blue going at each other, it's just pretty visually exciting.
It was definitely, I feel, in a lot of ways, cinematography-wise, and trying to make it more relevant to the plot and the characters, a step up from the Episode 1 finale fight in a lot of ways.
Yep. It was a vast improvement over Phantom Menace.
Which a lot of people are going to hate that we're saying that, but it is what it is. And a lot of people might hate what we're going to say next, because
so controversial.
Yoda shows up, and in the theater, I was like screaming. I had taken a girl. We saw the 3 a.m. showing because we didn't get tickets for the midnight showing, so we'd stayed up all night to watch it. Yoda shows up at the end of the movie, and
people just lost their flipping minds.
Yeah. They were cheering and screaming and laughing, and some people say they were laughing because it was ridiculous, and maybe you could say that, but we were laughing because it was just so crazy and awesome, because we were not expecting Yoda.
No, I totally cheered when that happened, and tons of people did. Like, the vast majority of people I saw it with were just like screaming excitedly that Yoda had just come out.
Oh yeah.
So it's
It's a good setup. I mean, he comes in on his cane and you see the shadow and you hear the cane and you're just like, yeah, he's here. It's time to clean house.
yeah. So for emotional impact, I'd say that's one of the highest, just because of Yoda.
Yep. They do try to insert some emotion by saying, "Oh, you're my Padawan" and stuff like that, and maybe that ties a little bit to some plot relevance, but it doesn't even pay off or refer to anything. It's not significant. It's more just like, here's some random tidbit of information. So
yeah, it's letting you know something that doesn't change a whole lot, but
it's there. So they're trying to insert that type of emotion, but just the excitement of finally being able to see Yoda, as George Lucas puts it, go to town with that little lightsaber.
Well, and not even just the lightsaber, but that force exchange is amazing because it really shows you how powerful he is. Like, if Yoda wanted to be more offensive, he probably could have taken out Dooku, but
this goes to the arbitrary, though. Like, I do think that was really cool because it did show how powerful Yoda was. But when Dooku says, "Oh, but we can't
Skills
beat each other with the Force. Yeah, we're gonna have to switch to a lightsaber." You're like, that's totally arbitrary. Like,
right.
what makes it so powerful? And that actually does contribute to the, okay, Yoda is more powerful than these other Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
He can actually block and or contain power. It's one of the very few times that you really see a Jedi acting differently than other Jedi, which it's only Yoda.
Yeah.
Ever.
Well, he's basically absorbing the lightning on that last exchange, which the only thing that's comparable is Vader absorbing the energy bolts on Cloud
From
City.
the blasters.
Yeah, when Han shoots at him. So
maybe that's where he learned it, except I think he was passed out.
no, he's still awake.
Is he still
He's
awake?
cuddling Obi-Wan. They're over there hanging out together.
Having a bromance moment.
That's what I'd be doing.
So yeah, 4 out of 5 for emotional impact, like personal emotional impact. That was awesome.
Yeah. Plot significance, it's basically the same as before, and I'd say just a little bit less because at that point it's kind of like, in terms of the plot, it's like, okay, now just someone else is trying to stop him. If you're talking about just story elements, it's unnecessary.
It's unnecessary. So 1.25 just to be different.
1 1/4.
1 1/4.
But choreography, I give it a middling because it is interesting, and I do think it's a fun aspect to have this force assisted leaping and bounding on an extended level. Like that probably takes a severe amount of power, especially to help someone as old and decrepit as Yoda.
See, and I actually would have given it a higher rating if they had actually showed Dooku feeling and responding as if he was overwhelmed by what Yoda was doing.
Yeah.
He doesn't like seem out of breath. He's just sort of like, I can't beat you, so I'm going to run away.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't feel like he's threatened so much as like, oh, I guess I'll leave.
Yeah, we're just going to fight like this for 20 hours, so I'm just going to run away now because this is going to take too long.
Yeah. So it is interesting, but I think it is also worth mentioning that a lot of people don't like, or maybe not a lot, but there's a group of people that don't like Yoda using a lightsaber at all, just because that's not what he was about. By the time he's on Dagobah, he's moved beyond the need for something like that. And
I just think
it kind of undercuts the character to see him use it at some point, I guess.
I just think that he's a Jedi. Like, that's a passage. And so maybe this isn't as significant in the movies. It's mentioned briefly with Darth Vader, how the completion of your lightsaber makes you a Jedi Knight. Like, that's one of the big steps.
Well, and one of the first things that Obi-Wan mentions about the lightsaber is that it was the weapon of a Jedi. So if Yoda is at times the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, he should be using the weapon of a Jedi.
And there is a small setup for that too when Obi-Wan says, maybe one day you'll be able to best Master Yoda.
Earlier, that's a good point.
So
that's the setup. You wait 2 hours after that to see it.
I'll give it another 0.25 on the plot significance for that, just for a good setup, because
So
movies have
0.5.
terrible setups. So a solid 1.5. Even though it's not related to the overarching plot in any way whatsoever, at least there was a good setup. There was a setup with a payoff.
Yeah.
Which is very hard to come by in these movies.
Yep, for sure.
So choreography-wise, I thought it was fun. I thought it was ridiculous fun. I felt like Dooku was just like, I don't even know how Dooku was going to be able to stand up to it, so I wish they had shown that a little bit and like made it show in the way he was fighting. And so I'm going to go 3 out of 5, maybe 2.75 out of 5.
Yeah, I think I'm going to say I'm going to go with 2 out of 5 just because I do feel when you are watching the fight in like a more concentrated capacity, it does look like Dooku is fighting air sometimes. For obvious reasons.
Yeah,
but...
I'm pretty sure they were just like, hey, we just need you to spin around and swing your lightsaber, and we'll throw Yoda around you.
Yeah, we'll do this in post. Yeah, so I think just because it's not as effectual, I'll give it a lower at 2.
All right.
And also, at that point, they do kind of move past all realistic sword fighting because that's not realistic at all. No one can actually.
Well, Yoda is completely embraced by the Force and using the Force, so I think it's fine.
That's the dumbest thing I've heard all day.
Shut up. Okay, we're done talking about this. Thanks, guys, for joining us this week. We'll be back again next week to talk about more Star Wars stuff. And
may the Force be always in your favor.